Alright, good morning class. Today we're going to have a little bit of a review over Andrew Jackson. We're going to go over things like the corrupt bargain, which was the election of 1824, the Indian Removal Act, which also known as the Trail of Tears, the banking crisis that took place during his administration, the nullification crisis that also took place, what we call the spoil system, and just in general what Jacksonian democracy is. Alright, the first thing we got to talk about is, who is Andrew Jackson? Anybody want to tell me what Andrew Jackson is most famous for besides being president?
War.
During a certain war?
Yeah.
Alright, I heard New Orleans.
After
What?
a certain war.
Yeah, after 1814/1815, Battle of New Orleans.
Did he buy something?
Do what?
Didn't he buy something? Or was that a different president?
No, I think you might be thinking of Jefferson with the
it's the
Louisiana.
Jays.
With the Louisiana Purchase. No, that was a while before that. All right, so he's famous for the War of 1812, being a general in that, and then also, does anybody remember him being in Florida with fighting the Seminoles? Anybody remember hearing about that? The big Indian fighter is what he was known as, or his nickname, Old Hickory. I don't know if you ever heard that before, but his nickname was Old Hickory. Alright, so he decides to run for president in 1824. So, as you look in your book at page 338, there's a little map in there. He was facing off against John Quincy Adams, who was related to President John Adams, the second president, and then also a man named Crawford, and then a man named Clay, Henry Clay. Alright, so as you see there, what's the first thing you notice about that map?
Mostly Jackson.
Mostly Jackson. You see on there that he got about 42% of the popular vote, and he got around 99 electoral votes. But at that time, that still wasn't the majority needed, the plurality needed. He needed 32 more. So what Congress did was that in the case of a non-majority, they took the top three, and then they would have a runoff vote, and they would decide among the top three who would be the next president. So that meant that Clay was right out, but the fact that he was the Speaker of the House meant that he still had a position, but he wanted a higher position. So what he does is he goes to Jackson, and he says to Jackson, hey, if I give you my support, you make me Secretary of State, which at that time, the Secretary of State became president more than the vice president. So the Secretary of State was the stepping stone needed to become president. So Henry Clay, he said, Jackson, if you become president, I'll give you my support, and you can become president as long as you make me Secretary of State. Well, Jackson refused this offer, so Clay went to John Quincy Adams and proposed the same deal. And I guess he said yes because all of the majority votes after that went to John Quincy Adams, and that gave him the majority needed to become the next president. So this bargain that they struck between them would now become known as the corrupt bargain. So if you look on page 339, there's a little cartoon right there, and that is Henry Clay kneeling on top of Andrew Jackson. And what does it look like he's doing to Andrew Jackson on that
Sewing
page?
his mouth shut,
Okay, so why do you think that he would be sewing his mouth shut?
so we wouldn't tell it.
Exactly. He wouldn't tell everybody about this corrupt bargain. But this was actually a pro-Clay, anti-Jackson cartoon, but this actually failed because later on it was found out that he indeed did form this corrupt bargain with Adams, and this actually ruined his chances of ever becoming president after that. Alright, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the Indian removal, which we now know as the Trail of Tears. Okay, so in 1927, this was before Jackson even became president in 1928, the Cherokees in Georgia declared themselves as being a republic. They wanted to be known as their own sovereign people, their own sovereign nation. So they go and they create a constitution, they create police department, they create a post office. They become their own sovereign nation in the United States. And right away, the Georgia legislature declared that this was null and void. They didn't want another sovereign nation within a state. They said that they could not, you couldn't create a sovereign nation within a state that was already sovereign by itself. So that's like saying that Little Rock is going to become its own sovereign nation from Arkansas. So now there's the state of Arkansas, and then there'd be the state of Little Rock, which, since it's already a state, they said that that couldn't happen. So after Jackson came into office in 1928, he realized that he could not protect the Cherokees. If the state of Georgia wanted to come into their lands, he could not federally do anything to stop it. I mean, he could send an army, but that would just lead to potential civil war, which he didn't want that. So in 1830, Congress would pass the Indian Removal Act, which means that they would take all the Native Americans from the East Coast, the Seminoles, the Creeks, the Cherokees, I forget, there's two more, I forget the other two, but they would move them to a place designated west of the Mississippi River, which we now know as Oklahoma, and then there were also parts in Arkansas as well. So they passed the Indian Removal Act. Before they actually began to move any Indians, there was a case in 1832 with the Supreme Court. It was called Worcester, W-O-R-C-E-S-T-E-R. I'm not sure if that's Worcester or Worcester, but it's them versus Georgia. And in this, John Marshall, who was the Chief Supreme Court, head of the Supreme Court right now, declared that Georgia could not constitutionally take the Cherokee lands. And this infuriated Jackson because Jackson had just signed the Indian Removal Act. So he even had a quote that said, all right, Marshall's made his decision, now he has to enforce it. Saying that since Marshall made the decision, he's responsible if the Indians get killed by the native Georgians. So it wouldn't be until 1836 when the final Indians would be removed, and at this time it would be Van Buren that would have been in office at this time. Van Buren would have the last 18,000 Indians being moved, and that's what's known as the Trail of Tears. Most of the Indians that went along this trail would eventually die, freeze to death, starve to death. 345, there's a picture of the Trail of Tears you can look at, and I just want you to take a second to look at that and tell me what you notice about that particular painting. Yeah, there's a lot, yeah.
It's eerie.
What do you mean by eerie? Like the
clouds
it's
are
like
gray.
dark and
Yeah.
okay. So it's supposed to be like a somber tone with
Yeah.
it. It's supposed to be a sad picture. Anything else you notice about it?
People from all walks of life.
Okay. What do you mean by that? You want to explain that to me a little bit?
There's older people, and there's middle-aged people, and there's children in there. Looks like some of their livestock are in there.
Okay. I noticed that it seems like there's actually a lot in like wagons and horses, and then others, a lot of them have to walk. A lot of them would have to walk during this journey, and they don't portray it in here, but a lot of the times there would be snow on the ground, and some of them weren't even fully clothed. Like they might have been rushed out of there in such a hurry that they weren't able to pack winter clothes, so a lot of them, like I said before, had frozen to death. Anything else that you can see from that before I move on? Nope. Alright, so next we're going to talk about the banking crisis in the United States. The Second Bank of the United States was established in 1816 after the First Bank of the United States wasn't around anymore after 1811. As part of the charter, it was given a 20-year charter, and this a lot of people in Congress didn't believe that they actually had the power to create a bank, so this would create controversy later on between Jackson and the bank's president, Nicholas Biddle. So in 1832, Henry Clay and Daniel Webster would actually bring up a charter, would bring up a proposed bill to actually extend the charter by more years. At this time, the charter wasn't going to expire until 1836. So bringing it up 4 years earlier, they were trying to get it through before Jackson would end up vetoing it at some point or destroying it some other way. So with it being an election year, 1832, he had already won in 1828. He was running again in 1832. Clay and Webster were hoping that this issue would actually hurt Jackson if he vetoed the second bank of the United States. They wanted the people to see him as being a corrupt individual. They didn't want him. They wanted to portray him as somebody who didn't care about the common man, about the other people in the United States. They wanted him to seem like he's heartless. That he didn't want a central bank for everybody in the United States. So yes, Jackson would veto this bill, and after this, he would actually start to deposit money in state-ran banks. So he would take money out of the national bank, the second bank of the United States, and he would move it to what people would call pet banks, meaning that they were loyal to Jackson, they were state-ran. And he would do this to multiple state banks all over the United States. And so while money was being put out of the national bank, he was also taking in the revenue that would normally go to the bank, and he was also putting them in the state bank. So while he was taking money out of the national bank, and he was also bringing the revenue that was coming into the country into those pet banks, that means that there were no money coming into the national bank, and so everything that the bank owed, they would pay out of the national bank, until eventually there was no money left over, there was no money left to pay its bills, it went bankrupt, and ipso facto, we didn't have a second bank of the United States. It was destroyed. This would actually come back to, this didn't really matter. It mattered at the time, but it didn't really matter now, because there would be another United States bank established after this until we got to the Federal Reserve System, which is what we use now. So can anybody tell me why this would be a good thing and why this would be a bad thing? Tell me what are the pros and cons of destroying a national bank?
Well, pro would be that there isn't one entity with a lot of power.
Exactly. They don't want to have it be a monopoly with all the nation's money controlled in this one area. All right. Now, what would be a negative about destroying a bank? Anybody?
I guess the con would be that there's no, because they were issuing banknotes at the time, there wouldn't be a uniform currency.
Exactly. So you got to think, if there is no uniform currency, then how are they going to repay debts? How are they going to issue money if there's no common currency? So yes, that would be a big downfall about destroying the national bank. All right, now we're going to talk about the nullification crisis that took place. All right, so there in 1924 and 1928, years before that, there was known as a tariff bill. Can anybody tell me what a tariff is?
Isn't it like a tax?
Okay, a tax on what?
Goods?
Okay, what kind of goods? Imports, exports?
Isn't it import?
Imports. All right. So if there's an import tax, what would be the consequence of having a high import tax?
Higher taxes, you have to pay more money.
Okay, but what if you're a consumer, what does that make you want to do less? Because if they're importing and their taxes go up, then that means their price goes up. And while their price goes up, your domestic product stays down here. So what does that mean that civilians will want to do now?
Home goods.
Exactly, they'll buy more domestic goods. So this would actually, the idea of this tariff is for people to buy, Americans to buy American goods. They don't want us to buy foreign, mostly British goods, because we're our own independent nation. We want to be our own independent nation, so we want to create all of our all of our goods. So, the Northerners loved this, but the Southerners despised this, because they were used to buying cheaper British-made foreign goods. So, whenever this higher tariff kicks in, that means that they have to buy even more expensive northern goods, because it takes a lot more because they have to ship them down there. So it actually costs more to actually get them down there. So you might remember, anybody tell me who Andrew Jackson's first vice president was? You remember his name? You might have. John C. Calhoun. He was from South Carolina. Okay, so he was still vice president this time, and he was against this tariff bill. Being from the South, he wanted his constituents, the people from his state to actually be able to afford these products and goods that would actually be brought in from Britain instead of having to buy more expensive northern goods. So, alright, so in South Carolina there was a bill passed, and it was called the nullification bill. And what this did was, this actually allowed the states, if there were any federal laws that they deemed weren't constitutional, they could quote unquote nullify them, making them null and void, and then not have to be followed. So the deal was, if there was no bill for them to follow, how would the federal government be able to tell them what they can and can't do with the nullification intact? So in 1832, there was another tariff passed, and South Carolina nullified it. And they even said, if you try to enforce this bill, we will secede and fight against the North. So this was almost a prelude to the Civil War. And so Jackson would respond to this by passing what was known as the Force Bill. So, which says that as the federal government, we can force you to enforce this law. So we're going to send troops down there if we need to make you pay this tariff bill. So again, South Carolina was like, they nullified the Force Bill, saying, you can't tell us what to do, we're our own sovereign nation. So this goes back to states' rights, saying that we're our own sovereign nation, you cannot tell us what to do. So Jackson did indeed send troops. He sent them right on the North Carolina-South Carolina border. And Calhoun said, if any troops come into South Carolina to try and force us to pay for this tariff, then we will declare war and secede from the Union. Luckily, this never happened, because Henry Clay, I mentioned him earlier, actually proposed a compromise that said that the tariffs would decrease and reduce over the next 10 years. So just going from point A to point B, from going from the 1932 tariff to when the compromise was formed, there was really, really close to being a civil war before 1861. So does anybody want to tell me what could have happened differently that would have not caused a civil war, or what would have caused a civil war if something would have happened or something would have not happened? This is almost like a what if
Is it
kind of
like
question.
the Civil War? What?
No,
what
if there was a civil war in the 1830s.
What would have caused it?
Mm-hmm.
I guess if they didn't come to this compromise, how do you say, Clay, I guess?
Henry Clay.
Yeah. But there would have had to be more than South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
because South Carolina was by itself
Yeah.
on their stand.
Okay. But do you think that the other southern states would have come to their aid if they needed
Probably.
it?
You said the South hated these tariffs.
So do you think that it would have been like a north and south battle, or do you think it would be like one state against another state?
North and south.
Probably.
Okay. And see, this was more on states' right. There was no there was no issue about slavery, which wasn't even that big of a deal in the Civil War anyway. It was more about states' rights. All right. So now we're going to talk about the spoil system a little bit. Can anybody tell me what the spoil system was? Anybody remember what the spoil system was?
When Andrew Jackson, he became president, again, he could arrange his cabinet and administration however he wanted.
Okay. Do you know what his qualifications were that said he could do this? What qualifications did he use on those people that he hired compared to what had been done before?
They're usually his friends.
Okay. Friends?
Well, he said he didn't want like, I think, like, he didn't want corrupt office holders or stuff
Okay.
like that.
Alright. Can you expand on that? What do you mean by corrupt office holder?
Well, I mean, there were dudes, I don't know, like, were the previous, when he came in, the previous people, I guess, I don't know how
They
to,
expected to stay in office
Yeah,
after he came in?
yeah, and he just, that's what he said, he didn't want corrupt people in his office.
You mean like people who have had that position for like 20 plus years?
Yeah,
and
and
they
I
thought,
guess
they
they were
thought that
like-
they were gonna have
No,
that
his
position until they
definition
died?
of corrupt is just people who don't agree with him.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So he was looking for more loyalty. He was looking for people who were loyal to him, do what he said, and do it the way that he said to do it. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah.
Okay. Instead of, what was used before was called the merit system, meaning if he had the qualifications to do this job, then he was going to do this job. As opposed to the spoil system where if he's my cousin, I'm going to give him the job because I know him, he knows me, I know how he's going to work it. As opposed to this man, I don't know what his political affiliations are. He might vote against me at some point. He might not like me. So what Jackson was trying to do was he was trying to keep as many friends around him as possible. He was
Yeah.
trying to keep as many people close to him that he could rely on to help run his administration.
It said those who supported John Quincy Adams were corrupt.
Okay, exactly. Anybody that supported the opposite party was not fit to run anything. Okay, well, mostly it was the cabinet and then the bureaucracy. Any kind of executive position at some point. I saw there was a stat in there that said he removed every 1 in 10 executives. So if you can think about that now, since the bureaucracy is so large, if you think about that now, that's millions upon millions of people in the bureaucracy. And what he referred to it as a rotation in office, quote unquote, rotation in office, meaning that every president that would come in could, if they wanted to, fire everybody else that was in the administration and then replace them with new ones. Meaning that he didn't want anybody to get a position and have it for the rest of their life, which is what you were saying before. He didn't want anybody to be corrupt. He didn't want anybody to be there that shouldn't be there after a certain amount of time. And this also promotes amateurism, meaning that they're not all professionals. It's more common people running this, helping run this administration rather than professionals who get paid a lot of money to do this. So now we're going to go talk a little bit about Jacksonian democracy. All right. Before I even start talking about it, anybody want to give me a guess about what Jacksonian democracy means?
Democracy while Jackson was president.
I say that's what the denotation is. Anyone want to tell me what the connotative would be? Or the other way around.
Did we write an essay on this? Which I did fairly well on.
Sounds terrible.
Wasn't it agrarian?
So you might be thinking of more
Okay,
Jeffersonian. I say you got to remember that Jackson at this time was seen as a man of the people. He was the war hero. He was the man that everybody looked up to. He was the ones that he was the man of the common people. That's what people referred to him as, the man of the common people. And so even during his administration, he actually reduced you remember whenever they were voting, how it had to be white property owners? Did anybody remember that from before? Well, during his administration, his presidency, he removed the property requirements. So now all men, all white men could now vote. So this made him like the common man. He said any man, well, they didn't refer to black men as being men or more property, but any man has the right to vote, as he was referring to white men.
At this point, it was like was it the 3/5 one? Is that it?
I see, that'll be later, that'll be in the
Oh.
1840s, 1850s.
Alright.
That hadn't been passed yet. So does anybody want to tell, all right, so looking from that, what are the benefits of Jacksonian democracy and what are the negative aspects of Jacksonian democracy?
All the white men have a say.
Okay, that'd be positive.
Less aristocratic.
Okay, so meaning that there is no executive class that controls all the voting. There's not a voting bloc, which I guess would be the right word to say. Anybody have a negative on Jacksonian democracy?
Well, could you consider the fact that there aren't really professionals in the administration a negative? I mean, not necessarily.
True, meaning that they might not have the know-how to actually do their job and do it well.
So the government was less powerful, and they
The executive power was really powerful at this time,
Yeah.
but maybe more the bureaucracy. They were less professional, and so they probably weren't as efficient, less productive. Anybody have anything else about these Jacksonian democracy?
well, the opposition was saying that, well, the opposition's stand was a more prosperity. They felt more, a better transportation network, and Jackson wasn't worried about that.
Yeah. Well, that would actually become later on with the Whigs, because that's what the Whigs wanted. The Whigs wanted more transportation, which is how the Erie Canal was formed later on. They wanted railroads, they wanted all kinds of transportation. They wanted a unified national road of some kind across the nation. If you look back on page, if I can find it, okay, page 352. There's a political cartoon about Andrew Jackson. I just want you to tell me what you see there. First off, who wants to tell me what political cartoon this would be? Is this pro-Jackson or anti-Jackson?
Anti-Jackson.
Okay, why is it anti-Jackson?
They're claiming him as a
They're
king,
depicting him as a king,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
is what we don't want.
which
Okay.
is what we left England for.
So what else do you see with that? I guess there's a pamphlet on. Okay, it's a cartoon. But what do you see there? What's some of the things that stick out for you when
Well, he's
you
got a
see
big
that?
veto in his left hand.
Okay,
The Constitution's tore up at his feet.
okay. So what can those two things mean?
I think the veto means that he's gonna try to veto anything that he just doesn't agree with. No matter
Anything that doesn't benefit him or his administration. Okay. What about the Constitution?
He has no regard for it.
Okay. Just meaning that
He does what he wants.
exactly. Okay. Anything else? Did anybody read the provisions that are down there?
Place himself above the laws.
Okay. Anybody see the born to command
Yeah.
thing? Which might be a crack at him being a war hero. So saying since he's a hero, he deserves to be the president,
Destroy our currency.
which destroy our currency, which would be towards the bank,
Yeah.
the banking crisis.
Got a pretty sick cape though.
A scepter and a crown. Shall he reign over us, or shall the people rule? What does he mean by that?
I mean, all that.
It just looks what it says.
Wait, just explain it to us.
Well, should the people have the ability to, I mean, should they have sovereignty, or should he be able to just say something if it happens and it He's the ruler.
King.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, now since you're already in groups, I'm gonna assign you something real quick. It won't take long, I swear. I know. Alright. I just want you to, alright, for each of your groups, I just want you to give me some pros and some cons of each of these that I'm talking about. Alright. Indian removal. Pros and cons of Indian removal, alright? Banking crisis. Pros and cons of the banking crisis. What could have been done differently? What was a good thing about the banking crisis? What was bad about it? Nullification. What was good about the nullification crisis? What was bad about the nullification crisis? Spoil system. Spoil system. We got what's good and what's bad about the spoil system. And last but not least, Jacksonian democracy. What's good about Jacksonian democracy? What was bad about it?
Yeah, we agree.
Think of something.
Hey, it's my. Yeah. Did those. Okay. Guys, let me find which page this is.
4, 3, 4, 4.
What? When did I?
You sure it's right now?
Spoil.
You did it on purpose.
This is my bad handwriting.
Oh, really? Yeah. I think it's like a TV or Google.
It gets people who's been out boxes out of there. It's been there for a long time. So it gets
This class is up to good one.
the same time. I'm gonna say I had to take the removes long-standing
Moves crop. Yeah, I got a 10 out of 50 on it.
Are we all ready or we need a couple more minutes?
We essentially have one pro and none con.
Oh, okay. Because we got out of here at 9:40.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Well, we have what? Yeah. Alright, I think one pro and none actually did correctly.
Good enough?
Alright, let's just go around real quick. First group, Indian removal, what's good about it? Okay, more land. Okay, anything else, or just one of each? Okay, alright. In the back with the banking crisis.
I guess the pro for the second thing, was that there was a centralized control over the banking system. There was also, is beginning the paper economy, so since they were the only ones issuing banknotes, there was regulation from all these different state banks issuing monies. But a con of that bank would be that there's a lot of power in that institution, and there was a general public feeling that all the money, all the wealth was being transferred to the hands of few, like resources from the south was going into the north. And people just felt it was corrupt.
Alright, good job. Alright, nullification.
It was extreme, and his friends tried to avoid using it.
What was extreme, the nullification or the
Yes,
terror?
both.
Both, okay. Anything else?
No, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Alright, I don't think you really read, or you weren't really paying attention, but okay. Alright. Alright, here we go, spoil system. Give me something.
For a pro, we said that it removes people who have been in office, so you've got these people who think that they own the position,
Okay.
and so they're not there anymore. Cons is he pretty much just invites whoever he wants, not necessarily people with experience. And that was the other con, that you have less qualified people in the administration or office or whatever.
Okay.
That's what we had.
Alright, thank you. Alright, last one. Dexterity and democracy. Give me a pro and give me a con real quick.
The bad with the paper currency and the dependence on credit with market revolution.
Okay.
The good we
Is there no good one of dexterity and democracy?
yeah.
Free men or all white men are created equal, they can all vote. Alright, so, alright, good job. Alright, so in conclusion, we learned a little bit about, we reviewed a little bit about Jackson. If there's anything that you don't know, just let me know. Alright, good job, everybody.
Good job, Mr. Aguirre.